Hey, welcome back. It's Bob. Come on, let's talk. Hey, Katy. How you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Good. I'm
We've
ready.
done a lot of these recordings to date. One of the things that stands out is I think people would benefit from knowing more about your background
Why?
because there's a lot to it. You've been talking a lot. You've been referring a lot to different experiences,
We have
and
done a lot of these.
yeah. But let's talk about it a little bit.
Like
Are you
what?
up for it? Well,
I
let's
mean, I always talk about whatever, but I mean, like what? What do you want to talk about?
well,
Ask me a question, I'll give you an answer.
let's start at the beginning. Where did you grow up?
Oh my God. I grew up in North Wilmington in state of Delaware, way up north, almost to Pennsylvania, in a little teeny, terrible ranch house that had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. And we had probably the worst house in the whole neighborhood. I mean, honestly, that's where I grew up.
Did you know it back then?
No, back then I thought we were perfect. I didn't realize that a lot of times when I was going to school, and kids would make fun of me because I'd show up in these jean jacket things. Because back then jean jackets were cool,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a red jean jacket, a blue jean jacket, a green jean jacket, but I didn't realize they were my sisters.
Oh,
And so I got handed them down,
yeah.
and I thought they were cool, but everybody would kind of make fun of me back then.
Oh my gosh. What did your parents do for a living?
Uh, it's interesting. My mom didn't work at all. I mean, kind of a traditional old school family. My dad had what was known as a standardbred harness racing business. It was horses that pulled sulkies.
Just
Not
what's a sulky?
so it's like a cart that rides behind the horse, and the driver sits on the cart instead of sitting on the horse's back like a thoroughbred.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was young, that's what was my dad's business. At one time, my dad had 70, 80 head of horses.
Wow.
So when I was growing up, I didn't have a choice. So it didn't matter when I was 5 or 6 years old. Come weekends, I was cleaning out stalls and trying to carry water buckets. When I was young, I was dragging them because I couldn't lift them. But yeah, that was what dad did.
So that's where you started to develop the hard work ethic and
I think my father's probably the hardest working guy I've ever seen in my life. Not educated, World War II vet, big guy. World War II, all of his brothers were World War II. That crap about only one kid went to World War II is nonsense. They all went. And yeah, and then eventually when I was 16, I had my professional license to drive professionally harness horses all over the country. I went all over the country at 16, 17, 18, 19, and just worked with my dad and drove horses everywhere.
and
Sure,
and
there's videos out there somewhere on it.
but I think you did pretty well if I understand
Yeah, I
that
actually
correctly.
did really well. Drove hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and
Winning
hundreds.
races.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, did a lot. Had a lot of accidents. None my fault, but a lot of accidents. So I got out okay. Didn't break too much. But yeah, did that for a long time.
It's a lot of responsibility for a young man growing up working, the family business at the same time as trying to finish school and
Yeah, I know it now. Back then, I didn't know it. You just did
you
what
had
you
no
did.
choice.
No, you just did what you did, and it was part of the family. It wasn't until I got older that I started thinking about going to college. No one in my family had ever gone to college ever, and no one had money to do that. I had to figure out how I was going to put myself through college. I really, honest to goodness, I mean, you couldn't do it nowadays, but back then, I was literally a senior in high school, and I think I went to some guidance counselor and I said, "Hey, I think I want to go to college." By the way, it's like halfway through the senior year. And she's like, "There's no way you're getting into college now. You haven't taken SATs. You haven't done this. You haven't done that." And I just hurried up and took a bunch of SATs, you practice things and did it, did horrible. And went to some little offshoot of a major university and went to school and tried to figure out with my mom how we were going to pay for this, along the way. It was kind of a happenstance thing, actually.
And was law enforcement something that you were always attracted to, or could you have continued with the horse racing business, or
Yeah, I could. I mean, I was doing really well in the horse racing business, and along the way, I actually, as a young kid, learned to fly. And the reason I learned to fly and got my pilot's license is because I could drive more horse races. So if I raced at a racetrack back then called Freehold in Freehold, New Jersey, during the day, instead of driving, I couldn't get back to Brandywine Racetrack, which is in Upper Newcastle, Delaware, in time to drive the first 2 or 3 races that night. But if I flew, I could. And so I actually learned to fly planes, learned to fly helicopters, learned to fly a whole bunch of stuff as a young kid, paid for it all myself,
How old are you at this?
maybe 17, 18 years old.
That's a pretty big endeavor to go say, I'm going to get
Yeah, look
myself
at
there
it.
faster and
Yeah,
go.
looking at it now, it is. Back then, I didn't think about it. It was just kind of neat. Um, and then for some reason along those lines, as I was getting older, I don't know if I saw some movie or whatever, but I'm like, I'm going to be a Navy fighter pilot. That's what I'm going to be. And because I was flying and everything,
Mhm.
and I remember talking to somebody, and they were, well, you got to go to college. I'm like, what do you mean I got to go to college to be a Navy? And I think that's why I started thinking about it.
Oh, interesting.
Law enforcement was nowhere in my thoughts back then. Zero.
So where did you go to school?
I went to school at Widener University at first, and
In
uh,
Delaware.
yeah, in Delaware. No, it's in Delaware, but it's really close to Pennsylvania. The main university is up in Pennsylvania, but
Mm.
went there. I got a 2-year associate's degree there. And at the same time, I started getting interested because I'd see these guys in these old Plymouth Furies that had really big hats on, and their uniform looked immaculate. And it was the Delaware State Police. And I was like, wow, there's a lot of esprit de corps there. And it looked really good. And I'm like, maybe I'll apply to them. And so I applied to them. The same time, I was still thinking about doing the Navy stuff. And lo and behold, I got in. Um, Me and like one other guy were probably the youngest guys in our class because we hadn't even turned 21 yet.
Oh, wow.
And you couldn't you legally couldn't be out on the road as a road trooper until you're 21 because you're carrying a gun,
Hmm.
And I turned 21 in the academy, I think. It was kind of it worked out, but it wasn't like methodical plan.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Was the academy hard? Like walk me through what it felt like, going through that
I
training.
mean, back then it was. I have no idea what they're doing nowadays. I mean, back then, first thing that happens is you stand outside. I did in the pouring rain the morning you were supposed to show up. They wouldn't open the doors. It was 6 a.m. And I think they didn't let us in until 8 or 9. And we just stood out there in the rain. And then, you went through a bunch of stuff. You got your head shaved. You started wearing these uniforms, very regimented, 6.5 months long. It was not like you know, uh, a friendly 6.5 months.
How big is your class?
I think we had 15 people in it.
Yeah.
And you don't realize how elite that is at that age. You're just like, I'm happy to be in. But they had thousands and thousands and thousands of applicants. And the Delaware State Police is still not that big, but I think back then we might have 400 or 500 troopers in the whole state.
Mhm.
They might have more than that now. I'm sure they do. But back in the 80s, it wasn't a lot. And maybe 15 people total in the whole class. So that you got a lot of individualized attention from the drill instructors. Let me put it to you that way.
Well, speaking of attention, I've heard you talk about the sign when you walked into the Delaware State
Yeah.
Police and you're going through the academy.
Yeah.
Tell what did that sign say that was at the front of the classroom?
When you go into Delaware State Police Academy, and I'm sure it's still like this, I haven't been there in years, but you get down a long hallway, and on the right, that's where the captain's office is. And then down the halls, the drill instructors, and there's a seal on the floor. And the seal is of the Delaware State Police crest.
Mhm.
Now, if you're a visitor and you step on that seal, you're fine. If you're in the academy and you step on that seal, whole nother thing happens.
Mm.
But to go past that seal into what was considered the large classroom back then is where you took most of, because there's a lot of academics in it. I mean, you got to learn all the laws, you got to learn all of criminal prosecution stuff. You got to learn about just
Process
a million things.
procedures.
There's a million things to learn: accident investigation, all this stuff. But at the top of the front room where the chalkboards were, there was a blue and gold. That's Delaware State Police's colors, blue and gold. A sign that said "Pay attention to detail." And when I was a recruit in that, because Anderson, I'm in the first seat, and so when the DIs came into the room, they were very energetic. By the time they got to me,
What's a
because
DI?
a drill instructor,
Okay.
because I'm Anderson, I'm sitting at the very first seat, so I got a lot of attention when they came in. But I never really understood what that meant until I got out on the road and you started going to things after you went through field training and you went to stuff by yourself. That'll save your life in a lot of ways, and it'll save your buddy's life. And so I kind of adopted that over my entire career, whether it's business, law enforcement, whatever. People don't tend to pay attention to details, and details is what makes or breaks you in anything, in my opinion. You know,
And did you maintain your pilot certifications as you're going through the Delaware State
yeah.
Police?
I still have them now. I've been a pilot for 40 some years, which
Yeah.
is a little scary. And I've flown a whole bunch of stuff, you know.
So you graduate from the academy, you're a Delaware State trooper,
Mhm.
not a lot of them, throughout the state, very elite, group. What did it feel like to respond to like your first major event?
The first one I'm sure I did a bunch of them before this, but the first one I remember, it's kind of a funny story. I wrote about it in my book. It's funny now. It wasn't funny at the time. I was out on my own, and I was at Delaware State Police Troop One. It was the most northern state police troop in the state of Delaware. And back then, all the state police troops had gas stations. And so you had a gas pump in the back of the troop. Now I have no idea what they do.
You have
And
your
so,
own Plymouth Fury.
yeah, yeah. Back then it was like Plymouth Furies, Dodge Diplomats. What it was old.
Tiny cars.
No, the big
That's what I'm
cars,
saying. Yeah.
big cars, but just not what you think of now. And I'm sitting there filling up the gas tank of an old Plymouth Fury. And back then, you got to remember, inside a police car, there was no cages, there was no computers, there was no cameras, there's no video, nothing. You had a radio that had 4 channels on it, one for each county in the state, and one to run information on. And as I was sitting there filling up the car with gas, and Ida Frank came in, and Ida Frank's an armed robbery. And you don't know this as a young police officer, but it was an Ida Frank at the Dunkin' Donuts on Philadelphia Pike. Well, the Dunkin' Donuts at Philadelphia Pike, I can see from my filling up my police car.
From the
I'm looking
station.
right at the Dunkin' Donuts. And so I'm a brand new trooper, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get this guy, and I'm filling up my car, and they're coming in, Ida Frank in progress, Dunkin' Donuts. Get back in my car. I come pulling out of the troop, make a left, go down Philadelphia Pike, maybe 200 yards, turn into the Dunkin' Donuts. And of course, you don't realize this, but later on you do. Like the guy's gone. The guy's been gone for 10 minutes by the time the call comes in, but you don't realize that when you first start doing this. So I go in, I've got my hat on and everything, and I'm taking, all the information and put out an all points bulletin. And then when I come back to my car, who is there but my sergeant? And he's pulled up and says, Trooper, what do you got? And I say, Sergeant, I got this armed robbery. I'm getting ready to put out an all points bulletin. I was very meticulous about my uniform, my car. And he said, can you step to the back of your car with me? Because I want to show you something. And I said, sure. And so when I stepped to the back of my car, my whole life passed in front of me because lo and behold, if you don't remember this, if you're not old enough, in the old days when you filled up cars, it was behind the license plate.
Mm.
That's where the gas tank went in. And when I was standing back there, I had the entire gas pump from Troop One.
So you were so enthusiastic to respond to this that you took off out of the station with the pump in your car
I had
still.
the pump, the hose, the entire top part of the gas pump itself.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I can't imagine the amount of sparks that were going down Philadelphia Pike when I was driving down there to get this. But I literally thought my life was over. And it's one of the things why later on in my life, and we, don't need to get all the details, but it's why I really started being fascinated by leadership because trust me, in those days, that could have been the end of my career.
Well, because you start hearing fire trucks, like it's not just your
Oh
car.
yeah, I mean we could go on and on. I mean, as I'm sitting there, I'm watching 3 pumper trucks drive down Philadelphia Pike because there's 400 gallons of gasoline in the back station of Troop One, and they're evacuating prisoners from the troop. Like this got bad. This was not like just Bob pulled the gas pump out, and so I just think that it was one of the things that triggered me because the way I was treated by my sergeant afterwards and the way he navigated this with me, obviously I didn't get fired. I became a legend inside the state police, not for a good reason, but I became a legend to this day, probably inside the state police. But it was one of those things that in life it just made me think a certain way after that because he really did guide me through that. I just remember going home that day and telling my dad like I'm going to get fired. There's no way I didn't, so it worked out. But
Yeah, yeah.
very
But
memorable first Ida Frank by myself.
oh my goodness. So how long did you serve in the Delaware State Police?
I was there from September 4th, 1987 till April of 95 when I went in the FBI.
And sometimes like operating by yourself, responding to all
Oh,
types of
all the time.
events.
Back then,
Yeah.
I mean, the state police ride alone. There's nobody in the car with you.
Mhm.
And back then there wasn't a lot of county or city police, especially in Lower Delaware. There was no county police. I still don't think there's county police
Mm.
in Lower Delaware, and very few city police officers in Lower Delaware. In Northern Delaware, there's a bunch all over, but down south, where I eventually was transferred, there was nobody. It was the state police.
And did you become a paramedic at this time too?
No, later on, I'd been on the road for many years, and then there came I got very frustrated because in the old days, in the '80s, when you're on the road, you go to a bad accident or a shooting or a homicide or something. I mean, what you had back then is you had a blanket, a fire axe, and a box of flares. That was your first aid and your traffic accident kit or whatever. And so you'd come with this old wool blanket and you'd cover people. And, got very frustrating to show up at different locations back in the 80s and somebody may have been alive, but they died before an ambulance gets there. So when there became a time in the state police where they were doing trooper paramedics and aviation and helicopters and all this, that came out. And so I volunteered to go through paramedic training and became paramedic after that also.
So when did you start thinking about the FBI?
Not till a long time. And honestly, I never really thought about it holistically because if you think about it, back in the old days, if you had 10 years on the state police, you got a pension.
Mhm.
And I came from a family of, lower middle class, maybe upper lower class family that none of my parents are at a pension. And so that was a big deal to me. And it wasn't until late. I was literally driving someplace one day and there was an FBI agent that was in the Dover office that was coming the opposite way down some little county road near some Amish farms. And we passed each other and he flagged me down. And I turned around in my police car and pulled over and he had seen me at a bank robbery or something. And he literally handed me an application. And here's a guy that didn't need to do anything, right? He's a senior FBI agent, got a great life, but he literally handed me an application. And I said, "What's this?" He said, "It's an application to get in the FBI." He goes, "I need you to fill it out and I want you to give it back to me." And, the rest is history from there, which I was pretty lucky.
So, remind me, you served, 9 years in the
Yeah,
Delaware
eight,
State
nine
Police,
years.
8,
Yep.
9 years. And so then they do call you up and say, we
Yeah, relatively quickly, within a few months, which is unheard of. For whatever reason, and I ended up going into the FBI right after that.
okay, so you go into the FBI Academy and graduate out of that, which,
Mhm.
is its own intense elite group of individuals. Did you feel like you were one of many in that group? Did you stand out? Were
No, I mean, and FBI does it different, but they have a huge candidate pool. They're usually
diverse backgrounds?
oh no, I mean, yeah, I mean, but nobody in the FBI is just coming out of school. Like when I went in, a class had 50 people in it, but you might have had 5 million applicants or whatever it was, some crazy number to get into the FBI at that point, and they would pare it down. And then, from 30,000, whatever, they would take it down to 50 and you'd go in, but everybody was a lawyer, a doctor, been in the military for 10 years, was a cop for 5 to 10 years. Everybody, you have
Had
to
some
have
type of
college.
professional
So,
experience.
there's a lot of people in my class spoke like 4 languages. I barely speak English, right? And so it's way different than a state or local thing. Way different.
So you go through the FBI Academy, and then where do they send you?
I was sent. You do this in front of your class. You open your orders, and it literally calls divorces in our class. Like there was 3 or 4 people got divorced right after orders in my class. And you open it in front of the whole class, and you might go to San Juan, Puerto Rico. You might go to New York. You might go to L.A. You might go to Lima, Ohio. We have one guy go there. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. And I went to the Washington Metropolitan Field Office back then, Washington, D.C. It was murder capital of the United States in those days. And I got sent to a drug squad. And, you know, I'm a guy that, this hair is so far out of regulation for being a state trooper. And I remember when I showed up to my drug squad, my boss said, "Hey, don't cut your hair for a year, lose the suit, and I'll see you tomorrow."
Mm.
And that was my introduction to what we were doing. And it was just way different, you know?
Yeah. So your hair gets long, and how do you spend the next year?
Buying dope. I mean, we bought a lot of coke, a lot of crack, a lot of meth, a little bit of heroin.
Hmm.
I didn't even know the FBI bought drugs. I thought they were bank robberies or whatever. Even though I'd met some FBI, I had no idea what they did.
Hmm.
And then I got on the SWAT team there, and then a friend of mine that was on my squad said, "Hey, I'm trying out for the hostage rescue team." He made it on, and then 6 months later, I tried out for the hostage rescue team and made it on, and went down to Quantico.
And so, did you still feel like you were making a difference when you're, buying, and selling, drugs like
I had no
undercover?
idea, even after being a state trooper for so long, I had no idea how much drugs there were and in the
Mhm.
quantities. Like the difference between state and local, a lot of times in the FBI, I mean, we would buy kilos and kilos and kilos and kilos of cocaine back in the
Mhm.
day. I mean, and it just never seemed to stop. Um, So it was a little different.
But certainly as you climb your career, like you get bigger picture of everything, that's going on.
Yeah, I mean, slowly over time. I mean, you start to realize that you're working investigations that encompass the country or the world
Mhm.
compared to a state, um, and it becomes bigger and more complicated.
So you go through HRT, you get selected, which I don't mean to minimize because that's a huge,
Mhm.
honor on its own. Only the best of the best, continue to move forward. How do you, what role do you play on HRT and how do you spend that
Well, I mean, I
time?
don't think the hostage rescue team is the nation's counterterrorism team. That's the first thing. People don't understand that, because of posse comitatus and other things, the military can't act inside the United States. When you see stuff on Delta, SEAL team, or whatever, that's extraterritorial.
Mhm.
Inside the United States, it's a national asset. It's controlled by the Attorney General and the FBI director. People know, I think, HRT from like Waco, Ruby Ridge, and other things. That's not the holistic HRT. I mean, HRT does so many operations a year globally that I'm not going to get into here. That it's amazing. Um, Great place, in my opinion, to work. Some of the best people I've ever worked with in my life. Unbelievable esprit de corps, camaraderie, and just cutting edge.
Yeah, and nobody knows it like those people, right? So close relationships, just tight.
Yeah, they'll last forever. I mean,
Yeah, and so you respond to hostage situations in the United States, but you do get deployed overseas.
yeah, I mean, I was involved in 6 or 7 in the United States. I can't tell you how many war zones. I mean, that's just kinda normal. I was Kosovo, Serbia, Mogadishu later on, and a bunch of other bad places I wouldn't recommend going.
Mhm.
Um, all all while wars are going on because there's different it's so, after even before 9/11, people don't understand how globally terrorism and everything's connected. And if there's a US person there, we have a vested interest in getting them out alive, regardless of what's going on. And the government will use whatever asset it can use. And some cases it was the hostage rescue team, some cases it might have been other things, but it's used a lot. Um, and it's used in very, very high risk uh, conditions
Mhm.
most of the time.
And so when did the hostage rescue team end?
Well, hostage rescue team
Well, your
is still
your your
going.
time how did you get promoted to
Yeah,
the
I
next?
left. It's kind of weird. I was actually on an operation in I won't say where, somewhere in California, and when 9/11 actually happened.
Yeah.
And so planes are hitting the buildings and stuff, and we're, and literally had just gone into a place to arrest a bunch of guys. And I remember a TV being on, and there was a playback of one of the planes hitting one of the buildings. And I remember looking at one of the guys that was on a team saying, "Is that a movie? Is that real? Like, what is that?" Because we're in the middle of arresting a whole bunch of bad guys, and within a few hours, they had all of us. Usually, we fly on the military, but they had all of us respond up to the nearest airport to us, and we were actually put on. I think it was a 757. I won't say what airline. I remember getting bussed up there. The whole airport was evacuated.
This is when the country's grounding flights left and
Well,
right,
not
and you
not all the
guys.
planes finished being hit either,
Mm.
and more had hit while we were moving to try to get back towards the East Coast to figure out, is this war or what are we doing? And we were put on a commercial airliner, 757. I never forget this walk through the metal detectors. We're all in assault with automatic weapons, and I just remember the
Fully
ding.
loaded.
I just remember all the dinging.
Yeah.
Every time a guy went through, the alarm would go off, and there was nobody standing there. The whole place was evacuated and surrounded by police. And we got put on this commercial airliner. There was 50, 60 of us, and two guys came in shorts and t-shirts, no flight attendants, and
But this 50 or 60 is all like you guys, right? Like
it's all a
US
hostage
government.
rescue team,
Yeah.
yeah, and no flight suits, no uniforms, shorts and t-shirts,
The pilots.
pilots, and the whole place. You got a picture of this. The whole place is evacuated, and they said, "Sit down, we're taking off." And I remember we were scattered all over this giant airplane, and the door was open to the cockpit, and all the heads of the hostage rescue team are trying to communicate with Washington to figure out what's going on. And we took off, and this crap about all the planes were grounded. I could tell you one plane that wasn't grounded because we were coming back. And I just remember I was taking off one of my body armors and guns, and I remember looking out the right window, and like 5 feet off our wing are two F-16s.
Mm,
And I remember saying to another guy, going, "This ain't right. Like, what is going on? Like
mhm,
what's actually happening?" Because
mhm.
like, you know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, literally two F-16s sitting, and they sat there. I'm sure they changed out because of fuel, but they sat there all the way to. So we landed, and we actually landed at National. We flew over the Pentagon. It
Mm.
was night by now. It was still on fire. And when we hit the ground, I won't say who, but we got met by very high ranking US officials. And, the rest is history on 9/11. It just took off from there. I mean,
So you immediately take a new assignment though, and like the whole
me and
world's different,
me and
but
thousands of people, the whole world's different. I mean, the next day, Bob Mueller, who was going to be the director, was coming in. He hadn't even got there yet. And there was back then we sent teletypes to tell you how archaic this was
mm,
in the US government. And a teletype came out and said, everybody, it was supposed to report to headquarters. I don't care where you're at, what you're doing, come to FBI headquarters right now. And I was supposed to have been up to FBI headquarters. And I remember I reported to FBI headquarters September 12th, probably the worst time in the history of anywhere to get promoted to a supervisor and go into FBI headquarters. And, we're putting thousands of people through that building every 24 hours, thousands and thousands of people trying to figure out what went on and what happened and what we're doing and how are we going to stop this. And it was an unbelievable time. I don't think most people even understand it. Now I'd probably say 95% of the people that lived through that are out of the United States government.
yeah, that's incredible
I mean,
though
they're
that
not in the CIA or the FBI or NSA. I mean, like when I came up through the ranks in the FBI, everybody lived through that. Everybody remembered how much we had to pivot, right? And now I just don't think you have that uh, knowledge base in
mhm,
there
mhm.
from what actually went on.
So what new assignment do you take on?
Just I was a entry level supervisor up there, and then over the years, I kind of went back and forth. The FBI is like the military. You kind of come back to back to command, which is headquarters, out to the field, back to
Mhm.
command, and went back and forth a few times, a lot actually. I think I was promoted 14 times in the FBI. I don't think I ever missed one step.
But
Um,
incredible, you move around and pick up that experience and really understand the organization across the board.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, you're definitely, and it's the difference between running national programs and coordinating with every intelligence organization in the world versus being out into a field office where you're running operations to that field office. And did that for years back and forth until I was eventually head of the espionage section, eventually head of,
Back
uh,
in Washington, in the
yeah,
Washington
at
field office.
headquarters. And then I went out to Albuquerque and ran that field office for several months, then came back to headquarters. And by then, I think I was in charge of something else in counterintelligence. Then I went out to Washington field office and
Mhm.
ran the intelligence division. Came back to headquarters. Eventually became, head of counterintelligence, and then eventually the executive assistant director, head of I don't know 20 some thousand people in the FBI.
But we have episodes that talk about this in a little bit more detail, but your counterintelligence experience, what are you doing at that time?
I think it's all changing after 9/11 because traditionally counterintelligence, there'd be a lot of surveillance, a lot of intelligence. I my whole background growing up in law enforcement, if you listen to what I just said, is much more aggressive towards prosecution and disruption. And I think as after 9/11, it changed a lot of how the whole United States intelligence, State Department, White House, everybody felt about, spies and economic espionage and different things that may have or may not have been, depending, prosecuted in the way they eventually are. But it became very aggressive towards, disrupting and putting a lot of these people in jail.
How many spies were you able to
A lot.
disrupt?
I'd say, probably conservatively, if you look at even, we may not have arrested him for being a spy, but we knew there's well over 20.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, there's been a lot of spies in the FBI, a lot of spies in other places, but the ones we've obviously identified, we prosecuted. But to me, that's probably one of the worst things you can do to your country is be a spy. I hated spies. You can ask probably the last 4 or 5 attorney generals that I worked for. I could tell you every director, if they've ever said anything about Bob, is he hates spies. Very vocal about it, actually. White House, whoever. So I was fairly aggressive on spies.
And these are spies in government, but also in the national lab environment
It's
as well.
anywhere.
Yeah.
It's anywhere that somebody's trying to hurt the United States. People don't understand. I say this sometimes, but people don't understand it. Like all that stuff you read about in books, it almost glorifies what a spy is. A spy is you're a traitor, and you're a traitor not only to your family, to yourself, but the entire country.
Mm.
And you're trying to put another country in a position that it can best the country you're sitting in. And so I take that literally, and I don't like it. And unfortunately, people do it for different reasons. None of it's justifiable in my head. And I have a reaction to that. And I've been in position to lead those things over the years. And so I think we were very aggressive on it.
So they move you up and you get greater responsibility and you change and get promoted within the
Yeah.
FBI and ultimately rise to the number three position. You're the executive assistant director. You're handling, kind of half the organization at that time underneath you. What responsibilities were part of that
I
role?
mean, at the end, before I retired, I mean, I was in charge of global cyber, any cyber event that happened anywhere in the world, that was in a division under me. Any
At a time where that's just heating up and becoming a
Oh,
more
it's going absolutely crazy. You just at the beginning of my career, no one even knew what cyber was. At the end of my career, that's all you talked about. It was cyber terrorism, cyber counterintelligence, cyber criminal. It was all cyber.
Mhm.
But I was in charge of all cyber. I was in charge of any criminal operation in the country, the entire criminal division center. I mean, it didn't matter what it was. Um, I was in charge of any critical incident response. When I was there, we had 400 bomb techs, four or 500 airplanes. I don't know how many helicopters. All that sat under me. There's just a bunch, and I'm not even touching it because people don't really have the grasp of what that entails. It's tens of thousands of investigations, and just coordinating that and making sure that nothing fell through the cracks. And then, in the middle of that, you throw in the Sonys, the Ed Snowdens, the big cases that everybody would remember. There's a lot going on.
And you're managing all these incidents, these assets, the personnel, alone, and then you're also responsible. You're briefing, House and Senate. You're talking to the White House, DOJ. Like you're
Yeah,
keeping
I
everybody
mean, at
informed.
that level, it's everything you never wanted to do in law enforcement.
Mhm.
Like I never went into law enforcement to do any of what I'm about ready to say, but it's a huge part of your job. You know, as the executive, I spent so much time in the Senate, the House, the different intelligence committees, the finance committees, over at the Attorney General's, office or wherever, the White House constantly, briefing National Security Advisor to the president or whatever. Yeah, I don't think anybody, maybe somebody does. I didn't. I never came into law enforcement doing any of that, but it's very much your job. And then dealing with obviously all the heads of our offices, all the special agents in charge, and trying to make sure they're getting what they need to take care of their people in the field. Um, but there's a lot going on with that, and it's different than what you do in traditional law enforcement. There's a lot of politicalness to it, I think.
And I think, over the course of your career, and this applies to anybody, but certainly in the experience that you bring to the table, how did you start to observe and really, learn about leadership? I mean, not only do you lead larger and larger teams with people that sometimes you probably never meet in the course of your life, but you're also, you're briefing, the president, the vice president of the United States, you're briefing the attorney general on critical situations, and they have just as much pressure on them as well. Like, how does that interaction play
Well,
out?
I think it's a good question. I will tell you, it starts all the way back, even before the gas pump story, but that's where it really starts. Is I watched a guy take a situation because he believed in me more than I believed in myself and saved my career.
Mm.
I would have never been the guy in the FBI if that sergeant would have never done that to me. And how he handled that situation, trust me, you talk about a pissed off captain when he walked in the next morning and saw what happened that this young kid did to his troop. It's not like nowadays. It wasn't touchy feely back then. And that's where it started. And so learning from mistakes, but also watching how people handle them in leadership positions. I talk about this a lot. And, I've made a lot of mistakes, but the higher I went in any job, private sector or government, the more people you had to manage. And so I started figuring out real quickly, it's all about the people, right? You're not doing any of this as the boss. Like, I'm not doing any of that. There's people doing this. And how do you lead and manage those people so that they're going to work the extra hours? They're going to work the weekends. They're going to get stuff done. They're not going to drop the ball. When they come in, they're going to be prepared. That's not about a salary in the government. You're not making that kind of money. It's about a commitment. There's a belief in what you're doing. Now, that changes a little bit in the private sector, but knowing like in a critical incident, everything you hear in the first 2 days is wrong. I've heard that 1,000 times in real life. People coming in and I walk down the hall 2 doors down or 3 doors down and go to the director's office and tell them something that's absolutely categorically wrong because I just got briefed about it. 3 days later, when I walk back in, it's not even the same story. So that it's by the school of hard knocks, telling the attorney general something that's completely wrong. And by the end of my career, I would walk in and tell whoever, wouldn't care if it was the vice president. If I was down there talking to, at that time, it was Joe Biden, you, you tell them what you know, but say, hey, by the way, this is probably all going to change tomorrow. And there's a level of confidence you get with that because you've seen it so many times. Like, it doesn't matter if you're good, bad, and different. This is the way it is. And so a lot of it's just learning from experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Before we get to the private sector, there's a couple events that I do think are, rightly or wrongly, incredible experience that you do take into the private sector with you. One of them is the Edward Snowden investigation. How did that come across your plate? How were you notified?
Well, I mean, I think one, I still think it's the biggest national security thing that's ever happened to the United States. I think it's horrible, and I hope they get him back. I can tell you, in all the people I've indicted for espionage, that was the quickest indictment espionage I've ever seen. I think we did it in 3 days. Um, but again, you got to be careful what you say early on because when this first came in, I had a conversation with a counterpart of mine over at NSA. Hey, we lost a guy in Hawaii, trying to figure out where he went, blah, 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 blah. We had meetings back then every morning with the attorney general and the director. I kind of brought it up happenstance. Little did I know that night he's going on national TV out of Hong Kong and saying, by the way, I just stole all this stuff out of the NSA. I did not brief it that way at all. And so the next day and into that early evening, all that changes and it becomes just a complete debacle. And for the next, I think, 56, 58 days, I can't tell you how many people I briefed, the highest levels of the United States government. And every day it changed. Every single day, it was something different. And, after you watch Bob, I don't care if you're the director, the attorney general, whoever you are, White House, national security, it doesn't matter. And every day, it doesn't matter how much you like Bob. If every day this guy's stories change. And at some point you're like, what is this guy going to say? But the reality of that's how bad it was changing. And so it's not that I'm more conservative, but I take a more holistic look on anything nowadays. And the only thing I know is if it's bad at the beginning, it's really bad. If it's not so bad at the beginning, it's probably going to be bad. And so you have to prepare for that. But again, it goes back to the school of hard knocks. I think just learning it by doing it.
Mhm. And, on the cyber side, you talked about, this is an area that starts out, it grows, you start seeing breaches, you start seeing, major publicly traded companies breached and things of that nature. And then you come across a Sony breach, which is very different, in terms of the motivation behind it and the impact, right? It's not just stealing data and money, but
Well, the big thing about Sony, when I was the executive assistant director, first of all, we had a great field office, LA field office, great leadership. But the biggest thing about Sony back then, if you would have talked to me and said, hey, a nation state's going to attack a US company simply to destroy it, I would have told you you're crazy. Like that never would happen. Like, why would that happen? So, even a day before that, if you would have said to me, hey, this nation state is going to attack this company and try to destroy it, I would have told you you're absolutely crazy. Right. The reality is that in itself was a big deal. But it was also something between the field office and private sector entities that we brought into it. It was an awakening because this was really in my career the first time that I can go back and say, here's where somebody weaponized cyber.
mhm.
Like nowadays, you hear about that all the time, ransomware attacks, malware attacks, locking up infrastructure, locking up your IP or any of your information. But back then, this is like, you got to be kidding me. But it's the first time that I can remember that somebody's actually doing this to weaponize cyber to destroy a company. And I think that was the biggest thing really about Sony. That and the interaction that was seamless between, I think, the United States intelligence community the private sector because we needed help, and also the US government and the FBI. I think it was one of the monumental things where I saw everybody come together very quickly.
So all of the experience that you have with, nearly 30 years in public service, you decide to retire from the FBI and you go into the private sector. Cyber is, at the height, it's hot, there's breaches happening every day.
Yeah.
You take over as leading an incident response practice for a large
Yeah,
consulting company.
yeah, it was a real big company. I was a managing director there. Yeah, and I just point to that. Like, I didn't go into cyber because I love cyber. I hate cyber. I went into cyber because I needed my entire adult life was about mission. It was all about mission. And so when I came out into the private sector, I want to learn something new. I mean, I, I handled a multi-billion-dollar budget inside the FBI and tens of thousands of people. That's not making money, that's spending money. I wanted to learn something new, so I wanted to learn how to become a businessman. I think that was very important for me. Like I had done the cops and robbers thing for, 30 plus years. And so I wanted to learn business, but I didn't want to go out and just be anybody in business because I knew I'd get bored. I knew I wouldn't, because money is not what has driven me for so many years. So I really had to think about what I wanted to do. And so the reason I went into cyber is because I thought to myself back then, this is 2015, what's never gotten better in 30 years of law enforcement? Well, this has gotten better, that's gotten better. Cyber, I've never seen it get better. I've never seen it slow down. I've never seen it stagnate. And so I figured if I went out, I could learn business, but I could also help US companies protect themselves
Hmm.
and people protect themselves. So there was that mission with it. That's why I ended up in cyber. Just because I ran it had no bearing on it. I'm not a cyber technical guy at all. I know what bad guys do. I know how bad guys think. I know how that works. And behind all this technology, there's a bad guy,
Hmm.
even if it's AI. And so that was my expertise. And so I applied it to cyber. And that's how I ended up going out at first and running a very large incident response practice. All we did was breach, 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 breach all day long, every day. And that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks when I came out is like, I don't know how much the government really knows. Like I didn't understand, even sitting way up high in the bureau, briefing everybody in the world to include the Senate and the Congress, how much I didn't know. I saw what we investigated, but we invested huge breaches like the Snowdens and the Sonys, and there's others.
Right.
But we investigated on, say, the thousands of these things. I didn't realize there's probably millions of these things going on. And I'm saying that honestly. And when I came out, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And then
And you're
after
with one company
one
managing
company,
one
one
practice.
practice
There's
doing
hundreds of
thousands of breaches. And then I started thinking, well, there's thousands of companies. And then I started thinking over 2 or 3 years, I've only called the FBI one time. And it's not because I don't like the FBI, but it's because you're employed by the company. The company is your boss. I can't go off willy nilly to anybody like the state, local, federal. It's up to the CEO. And do we want help? Do we not? I can advocate for it all day long. Most said no. And I think that's something we should probably talk about eventually in an episode because I still don't know how clear the government's vision is into this. I think it's way better than it was, but I don't know if the average American definitely even has any comprehension of how prolific cyber attacks are now.
How was that transition to the private sector? I mean, we've talked about it in different episodes from time to time, but you have a budget,
Yeah, it
you
was
have like this institution wrapped around you. Then you go to the private sector, and not only are you trying to respond to these breaches and help these customers, but you have a revenue number you have to hit.
it was for me. It was I was lucky because it was cultural shock. I had no idea what I was doing. The first time somebody brought up and said, "What's your number?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And the guy laughed at me. And it was lucky because I did have a number. No one happened to tell me when I went to work for that company. And if it wasn't for a bunch of guys and gals that had been doing this for 25 years, and I had enough sense to, I don't care if you're way high up in this organization, you're now, even though you're high up in it, you're way down here because you have no idea what the hell you're doing. I remember I was sitting in a board meeting in our company and somebody brought up EBITDA. And I was like, I raised my hand. I mean, you remember, you're sitting around in a publicly traded company. We talk about EBITDA. And if you guys or gals don't know what that is, you need to go look it up if you're going to be in a private sector or a publicly traded company because it's all around earnings and spend and what's your actual cap table look like, And I said, "What the hell is that?" And everybody laughed and stared at me. And then I kind of got sarcastic and said, "Well, if you want to talk about abbreviations, I can give you more abbreviations than you have any idea, coming from the USIC and you have no idea what I'm talking about." But the reality was real. Like I had a lot to learn.
Mhm.
And you got to take that chip off your shoulder and go, "Yeah, I was way up here and knew everything about everything, but all of a sudden I'm not." And I really took those first 2 or 3 years building a practice and working in that company to learn, because that was the big thing to me. Like there was so much I didn't know about the private sector.
I don't think it's a natural transition for everybody to go from the
And
government
I
to the
don't think a
private
lot of people
sector.
make it. I got to tell you, there's a lot of people I know didn't survive out here. They've gone back to, and by the way, that's not good, bad, indifferent, wrong, or right. It's just the way it is. There's a lot of guys I know and gals that came out, tried it, didn't like it. Now they're, either retired or they're working for companies within the government again. And that's great. But it is way different than the private sector. Spending money is way different than making money.
Mhm.
And the other thing that was culture shock to me is if you wanted something, go buy it. If you were doing well and you were bringing in revenue, go buy whatever you want. But you want to spend 5 million on that, go do it. You want to, and it would just shock me because in the government, all your budgets are set years in advance, and you're tracking this stuff every year at the end of the fiscal year, and you got to figure out how much money you got to get rid of, or the Congress is going to give you more money back, and there's a whole rigmarole you go through of millions and millions and millions of dollars. Out here, it's not about that. It's about performance. I've met so many smart, bright people that just can't get anything done. And one of the biggest things in the private sector, and honest to goodness, people need to listen to this. If you're not listening to anything else, you got to be able to get stuff done. Like, I don't care what it is. It doesn't even matter if it's tying your shoes. You got to be able to get that done. And I've met really bright people from, all these great academic they got degrees out the walls, and they can talk and they can look at graphs and charts, but they just can't get it done. And in the private sector, you have to be able to do that,
Did
you
your
know.
leadership style change? Because, like, obviously, when you're in a national security, agency, you're leading, and people are tied to mission, and they're going above and beyond every day because there's great consequences if they don't. How do you lead in a private sector? Did that evolve? Like, how do you
I mean, it,
motivate
it
people?
involves a lot because out here, a lot of motivation is money, point blank. But I think if you're going to build a practice, build a company, scale a business, it's way more than money. It's about, instilling the same kind of things you do in the government about vision, where are we going to go, team, why I care about you, you care about me, how do we make ourselves better? I think in the private sector, it's a lot about education and training for younger folks. Yeah, they just graduated from, MIT, but they don't have any real hands-on experience. So they want to sit next to the guy or gal, especially like pen testing or technical stuff. I want to sit next to the guy or gal who's been doing this for 30 years. Like that's more important to them than a pension, right? Like guys like me that started a long time ago, it was all about getting a pension. In the private sector, it's not so much that. And so but again, it comes back to people. You've got business metrics, you got to run a business, but it's about what inspires your people and how do you tap in and how do they know you care?
Mhm.
You can't stand in front of and I've seen this done, a company, a practice, a business, it doesn't matter. We're going to do all this for you. You're going to go to these seminars. You're going to do that. A year later, nobody went anywhere. You might get away with that once. You do that again, people are leaving. And so it's a lot more immediate in the private sector than it is in the government. Most government people, I don't know how it is nowadays, but I was there, you were staying, no one was
Mhm.
leaving. In the private sector, it's very transient. If they don't buy into what you're doing, if they don't feel that you care and that you're trying to make them better. Um, so same leadership principles, different way of doing it and looking at it, I think.
So you obviously learn a lot, and you grow a large incident response practice. It's successful, and you decide to move, share your expertise, consult a little bit, and then go into a CEO role, and ultimately chairman of the board as well. And so you are running a company that gets, new leadership, new round of investment, and really change the whole dynamic.
Mhm.
Talk to me about just kind of that scaling process and the lessons learned along the way.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing about scaling is you got to have a vision and a plan, and it's got to be understood by everybody, and you have to make sure you test the infrastructure of the company that it can sustain your vision and plan. Nobody does this. Maybe some. I've seen it done both ways. One way, you'll destroy a company, possibly very quickly, by the way, and cause potentially even a bankruptcy. Maybe if you have enough money, you can catch it and reboot the company. But it's so crucial because, again, it goes back to people. People drive everything, even in AI. Behind the AI, there's a guy or a gal. There'll be less of them in the future, but there's somebody. And so I really can't say this enough. It's all about people. And I will tell you this right now when it comes to scaling a company, leading a company, any leadership role, if you think it's easy, don't worry about trying to do it because it's hard. I don't think successful people have a really good life balance. Why? Because if you're a leader and you're really trying to scale business and become successful, you're working weekends, you're working nights, you're working when everybody's on vacation. If anybody needs to take a pay cut in the company, you're taking it before you give it to anybody, if you do it right, in my opinion. There's a lot of really hard things that come with being a leader and scaling a business. And I think you need to ask yourself, are you ready to do that? Because anybody that thinks you just walk in and people follow you around because you're the boss, you're crazy. And I think nowadays, the younger generation is much smarter than I was. And when I say younger, I'm saying like 40 and below. They're way smarter than I was. You know, I didn't understand all this stuff back then. I had to grow and learn. But now I think people won't tolerate that, right? You need to make sure when you're scaling a business that everybody's bought into the vision and you, as well as the company, is prepared to execute that.
When I talk to people that have worked with you over the course of your career, they talk about, your dedication and mission, your dedication to government when you served in the public sector. How has that evolved over time now that you're in the private sector?
No, I mean, I still obviously I think we're in the best country in the world with the best people in the world. I mean, there's not even a not even a it's not even I've been everywhere. I've been to 50 countries and a bunch of war zones. Like I've seen bad.
Mhm.
This isn't bad. This is still, even with all the nonsense going on in the Congress, the Senate, and the White House, and everything else that's happening nowadays. I think it's the best country in the world. Um, but I still root on all of our government agencies. I think they're going through unbelievable changes right now. Some may be good, most I don't know. But I still think at its core, we got tens of thousands of people just killing themselves trying to do the right thing in this country. So I wish the best for all of them.
Mhm. Um, what uh, what advice do you have for individuals that are leaving government, going into the private sector today?
I think it's hard right now. I think the economy's tough. I don't care what anybody's telling you. I see what's going on in businesses. I think you need to know what you're getting into, and you should ask questions of men and women that have been out in the private sector for 5 or 10 years that can tell you how swiftly and how quickly things happen out here. It's not the government, although we've had changes in that where, that we've had, I think there's hundreds of thousands of people have had their jobs cut because of what's going on in our government now. But the private sector's hard, and you need to know what you're getting into and what job you're going to take. I think has a lot of impact on how they're going to look at you. If you have a job that people expect you to bring in revenue, you better bring in revenue. If you don't know how to do it, you probably should ask somebody before you take that job because they don't wait. There's no waiting a year to see how you do. You might get a quarter, maybe two, but not more. Um, there's other jobs that have more stability that are tied back to something that people might already know. But I think to ask people out in the private sector, served in all kinds of different positions, what's it look like right now? Because I think it's hard. Um, and I think honestly, with AI and quantum computing coming, I think it is changing the landscape of this whole country. I think there are jobs now that will never come back. I was out in San Francisco not that long ago giving a speech, and I looked over and there's a car driving next to me and nobody in it.
Mhm.
And there's people sitting in the back having a conversation, could have a care less that this car is driving them around with nobody in it. You think of what that could do. I mean, look at the industries that go away, cabs going away, Uber going away. Well, if they can drive a car, why can't they drive a tanker across the ocean? Do I really need a crew on that tanker? Maybe not. I think there's 20, 30 companies right now trying to get the first drones launched that could be Uber drones with nobody in them. I just think right now, if you're a younger man or woman getting ready to come out of college or getting ready to start a career, you need to be looking towards AI and quantum. Cyber is almost, 10 years ago, cyber was vogue. You got to look that I don't even think I wouldn't even recommend anybody to go do that. Like you have to be looking to where the technology is going because it's not a bell curve. This is going straight up. And I think in the private sector, especially men and women coming out of the government that are older or younger people that are trying to get into the private, this is where it's headed. And I think you really got to be smart in those areas.
Last question. You've talked about this continuous learning, and I think in every role that you've been in, you really understand the full extent of
Yeah.
what's involved, what you're responsible for, where it's going. This vision, where are we headed? You've talked a lot about clarity, purpose, vision, plan. Again, last question. Where does this all come from? Like, who instilled, kind of the values and leadership in that continuous learning
I mean,
philosophy?
I don't think anybody instilled it. I just did it out of necessity. You know, if you go back to 86, 87 till now, like you got to be kidding me. The difference in, I mean, literally, there's no phones, no pagers, no ATMs, there's no nothing. I mean, it was keeping up with the bad guys. That's what did it for me, because I was always chasing a bad guy. And by the way, they were always ahead of us, always. And so in the private sector, I've just followed that same philosophy. And if your company's doing good right now, what about next week? What about next month? What about next year? What are your competitors doing? Who's catching up to you? Are you leading the way? Are you not? It's that what if scenario you hear me talk about all the time. Like, what if? What if company B passes me? What am I going to, why are we looking at this? Why aren't we looking at this? Like anybody out there right now, like again, if you're not looking at AR or quantum, you're behind. You're way behind. You need to catch up quickly. So I just think it was out of necessity of trying to keep up with everybody, and stay in front of them. If you want to be successful and if you want to have a successful business, you have to do that. You just have to do it. All right. I think that's enough. We've talked a lot today. So thanks, Katie. Hey, thank everybody. I really appreciate you tuning back into Let's Talk. Can't wait to talk to you next. More very exciting episodes coming up with interviews and much, much more. So peace, man. Love each other. We need it.